The Fable and Folly Network supports creators of exceptional audio stories, including the one you're listening to right now. If you love our shows, we want to hear from you. Complete our listener survey at fableandfolly.com/survey. This will help us learn more about you, what you like, what you'd like to hear more of, and how we can maintain an inclusive, safe atmosphere. As a thank you for your participation, we have extras and behind-the-scenes content from your favorite shows. Fans make the network what it is. Thanks for listening, and we can't wait to hear from you. Find our listener survey at fableandfolly.com/survey today. Looking to get out of the ads and back to the story? Fable and Folly Plus is a new way to support the creators you love. The podcast you're listening to right now and more than 60 others can be heard ad-free for as little as $4 a month by visiting fableandfolly.com/plus. And now, you'll start to see Fable and Folly Network shows are offering bonus content to all existing and new supporters. Find exclusive new episodes from shows like Where the Stars Fell, The Call of Cthulhu Mystery Program, and Civilized. Plus, early access to new episodes of Midnight Burger, all still entirely ad-free.
Hi, Jeffrey.
Hello, Eleanor.
Hi, everybody out there. So we put out a call for questions about the show, and we got a lot of them. So thank you for that. And today, Jeffrey and I are going to answer some of the questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of them. And also, we're planning on splitting this up into 2 episodes. So we're going to do some in this session, and then we'll do some more later. But mostly I wanted to say that I'm super excited to answer questions and talk about the show now that we don't have to worry about spoilers because it's all over.
Yeah, which just to really underline that, we will have spoilers.
Yeah, this is going to be spoiler filled.
Everything, including things that never ended up in the show, but shaped how we thought about the show.
So if you are listening to this and you have not finished season 5, turn back now. You have been warned. Ooh. Yeah. Okay, that was your chance. Have you turned back? Okay, great. We're going to keep going. We're going to get going then. So, Jeffrey, I wanted to start with a question that is sort of like the one I think I'm most excited to answer.
All right.
Which Yami was kind enough to ask us. Was the ending always what happened? Did it change in any way over the course of the 5 seasons?
Oh, boy.
Because here's the thing. I feel like people have been asking us, do you know how it's going to end? From the very beginning.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We get that question all the time. Mm-hmm. And I have answered it differently over the last 5 or 6 years, depending on different things. And now I feel like I can give the most honest version of the answer to this question.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think here's my take on it, Jeffrey, is I feel like when we started the show, we had some really clear ideas of where we wanted to get to at the end of the show.
Yeah.
And they included things like we wanted to reconcile the entity and the supernatural in Mount Absalom with itself and with the town. Mm-hmm. Right. We really pivotably, I think we all knew at the very beginning that we were headed towards an ending that was sort of a happy resolution. Not your classic horror film, everything goes terribly wrong and everybody dies.
Yeah, or notably not the evil is defeated.
Yeah.
Kind of ending.
Yeah. We were looking for how do you solve this problem in a way that involves diplomacy and everybody getting to be a stronger, better version of themselves at the end.
What is the version of the ending that comes about because everyone got the therapy they needed?
Yeah. So I think that was a thing we were always in agreement about. I think I also felt pretty strongly that Lily was going to be the catalyst for whatever that thing was. Mm-hmm. That Lily, as our protagonist character, was going to have to be the one who sort of lands that plane, so to speak.
Yeah. That was something that, like, I don't know, we struggled a lot with that, I think, because there was this knowledge of, this is in many ways a story about centering Lily and Dot, and also not wanting to create a generational chosen one narrative.
Yeah, totally.
It didn't we wanted it to not be that Lily is destined to become the next caretaker or
that
solve
she's
this
stuck
problem.
in it, that she doesn't have a choice. Like a lot of which I feel like are archetypes that come up in these kinds of stories often. And I feel like there were definitely moments over the course of the 5 seasons where somebody would come in the room and be like, okay, just kidding. What if it was this other character who, lands the plane, finishes and I remember kind of having conversations where we'd be like, well, what if that changes, and kind of always coming back to like, no, it has to be Lily. Yeah. It has to be Lily.
I feel like Jess Buha as a writer was really good at advocating for the centrality of Lily and for her as a kind of a tentpole.
Yeah. Another thing that I remember very clearly agreeing to at the beginning was that Dot would not die.
Yes, that was always a thing that was really important, that this not be, even if it was about in some ways passing a torch generationally, it was not about Dot's death. And
I think in large part because at the beginning we spent so much time talking about how we wanted to discuss dementia and Alzheimer's, and we were all very, I should just speak for myself. For me, it was really important to make space for how long the process of losing someone to dementia is.
Yeah.
And we knew pretty early on that the story was going to take place over about 1.5 years. And which is, in case you didn't notice, the story takes place over the course of about 1.5 years. And that's not enough. That's not how dementia actually works.
Yeah.
You don't have your kind of first signs and then 1.5 years die. It lasts a really long time, and that's part of what is so tragic and scary about it.
Well, and especially in the case of Dot, who is has early onset Alzheimer's.
Pretty young, yeah.
She's in her early 60s, and it was important that she remain both a character in the narrative, and we very intentionally left kind of open threads so that the world you could see the world continuing on, because that's how real life works, and we wanted to kind of mirror that. And it was important that Dot continue to be a full character and someone who could go on and have these wonderful adventures traveling the world and things like that.
Okay, so is there anything else that you remember at the very beginning we were like, this is how this story will end?
Well, okay, so
because I'm running out of them.
Sure. So here's the big one that we've never had a chance to talk about, that like we thought in the beginning and eventually ditched, is that when we first were developing this idea, so just to make really clear, when I say the entity, that is a kind of internal word that we've used in the writer's room for the thing that is under the town.
It's what Dot calls blooms.
Throughout. Yeah.
Some people just refer to as the town.
The town, the one who blooms, thy green and growing arms, any of these names that various characters, because no one in the story actually knows what the truth of it is.
Yeah, so there's a couple of terms we'll probably define as we talk today that are like our backstage names for this stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, the entity is probably the biggest one that like we throughout talked about it as being kind of a singular presence that we refer to as the entity.
Yeah. So when the one of the seeds of a story that I was really interested in telling with Unwell is what happens when a kind of elder god, cosmic, in the kind of cosmic horror sense of, Cthulhu, or one of these unknowably large entities, a thing that cannot die. What happens when it does start to die, or its mind starts to decay? And so, like, when we were first putting together the show, we were working with the idea that Dot had dementia, but also this kind of elder god creature intelligence below the town also had dementia. And that was really interesting. But what we realized it was starting to get confusing and difficult and distracting from the much more important story we were telling about Dot and her dementia. And it led to these questions of like, oh, okay, is Dot's dementia caused by the entity? What of these are caused by what?
I remember that piece of the conversation is we had an interesting moment where we like really reckoned with, is Dot's dementia mundane or magical?
Yeah.
And
it was really important for us that it be mundane.
And ultimately deciding that it being mundane was more interesting, made more sense for the story we were trying to tell, and ultimately like closer to the experience we all had with dementia and family members and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a big thing that shifted. And
God, I forgot about that.
Yeah, I mean that happened
really early.
Really early.
I mean, so if the question is like, what did you know at the beginning? I would say this is definitely that's definitely a piece I feel like we worked out in the writing of season 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of things that are kind of like, and we've talked about this some before, but like what the show is about that shifted.
Thematically.
Yeah, and that definitely colored how the show ended and what the moving pieces were. But
ultimately, like, I think the thing I would say is, so we've enumerated a number of things that we knew at the beginning. And so, people always used to ask us, do you know how it's going to end? And I would say yes, because I felt like those key signposts, yes, we did. We knew where we were going. We had we said, we're driving to California. We're going to get there eventually. Like, we had that plan. And also, there's also another version of the story, which is like, we had no idea how we were going to get there.
Yeah.
We had some kind of signposts of like, we know we have to make these big story reveals before we can get to the ending. But like, man, there are just really large sections of the story that I remember walking into the writer's room and going, I really don't know how we get from here to there.
Yeah. Yeah.
like particularly heading into season 5.
Yeah.
I remember bringing the writers together. It was the first time we'd all been in a room together since, I think, before COVID. Yeah, we had not all been in a room together for years at that point.
Yeah.
And all getting everybody together and kind of walking into that room and going, I don't know if we can do this. I don't know how we get from here to there. And everybody going, yeah, me neither. And then we figured it out. Like, it was like that aspect to it. Dear listener, I'm excited to kind of like share that, like, yes, some of it was like jumping out of the airplane and being like, I hope this parachute works.
Or boy, I hope we can figure out how to design a parachute on the way down.
Yeah, exactly. And luckily, like, we have a brilliant team that we worked with, and I believed in our ability to figure it out. But man, yeah, some of it, occasionally I'd be like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know how we're going to do it. Well, I guess we'll see.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I want to share is from season 1, and this is obviously too over the top and like saccharine to actually show up in the script, but we knew, okay, we have this very adversarial and fraught and difficult place where Lily and Dot start at the beginning. And the emotional beat that I always wanted to be able to hit by the end of season 5 was for Dot to be able to look at Lily and say, if I had a daughter, I hope she would be like you. That kind of deep love that exists despite, because of, alongside of this really difficult illness. And I think that with our actors and writers, we got to a place where the affection and complication and I don't know.
I mean, honestly, you have mentioned that a number of times. Like, I feel like that, I have always known that that's a touch point for you of like kind of where you wanted that relationship to get. So the fact that I know that means that probably all the writers did too. Like, it's definitely something we've talked about a number of times. And I think Bilal wrote you that moment in the finale. Like that moment where Dot says, I could forget everything else, but I don't want to forget you.
Yeah.
Like, there is a way in which I think Bilal did in fact figure out how to put that emotional beat.
Yes. With much better words.
Right, exactly. Like, that's why writers. Right. Like I think there is that we got there. We got to see that arc from the beginning to the end of how Dot and Lily get to relate to each other. Yeah. Shall I ask another question?
Yeah. What's up next?
I forgot the cat was hiding behind you. Hello, cat.
We are recording in my home studio, which means
the cats are here.
The cats are everywhere and maybe participating.
Okay. Alex asked, what was the shimmering essence that was in the trace amounts of celery soda? And what did that contribute to the town taking care of its people? This fucking question, Jeffrey.
Great question. So
I sort of feel like I want to talk a little bit about like how shit like this gets in the story, and then talk about like what my logic of it is.
So that was an element that was introduced by Jessica Wright Buha and first designed by Alexander Danner.
And I feel like it is really notably, that episode is early enough in the show that it was still at a point where we were putting new things in. And then there turned a corner at some point where I remember being like, we are not allowed to put anything new in the world.
Yes.
You have to use the things that are already there. And I feel like I want to admit that this is one of the tools in the toolbox that we like put into the story that we never really like we never came back to it. We never really.
That's not true at all.
Well, okay, you talk.
Yeah.
It feels to me like we never really did anything with it.
No, that's very fair, but it is an element that shows up throughout the sound design as an underpinning layer. So it was originally, it originally was the shimmering dust in the air in the chapel.
Yep.
As Lily is lowered into the chapel, and then shows up again in the pipes and the
celery soda episode is the one where like it is named.
Yeah,
like we kind of notice it and acknowledge it. Yeah.
But then while it doesn't show up in the script, it sneaks into all kinds of places where the entity is more present. And the hope is that after encountering it and kind of having it pointed out several times, this you start associating that sound, the sparkly or to quote the Adventure Zone, the crinkle tinkles. Um,
that is what it sounds like. You're right.
Yeah, that's how I always kind of cashed it away in my mind. It shows up all over the place in the sound design when we wanted to very directly say this is a location that is one step more like touched by the entity.
Right. It has like a physicalness that brings you closer to the magic of the entity.
Yeah.
So
Well, and so I think
let's see if we both explain it the same way.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the physicality of the entity. For me, it was really important that we never like see with scare quotes the entity.
I feel like you and I had a disagreement early on about whether or not the entity has a physical presence at all.
Yeah.
And I thought that it did. And I had a vision in my head that at some point before the end of the story, we would, again, this is one of these like bad idea first, kind of like your like Lily Dot moment you just told. But like one of my kind of like touch points early on was like, oh, okay, by the time we get to the end of the story, we'll have a moment where like Lily is standing in a cavern and she can put her hand out and touch it.
Yeah.
And again, it's one of those things where it's like, well, that didn't happen, but also it kind of did.
Yeah, no, very much did. Well, and I think, the things that I wanted to avoid, because and I think this will play into some later questions, but like, it was very important for me never to close off what the entity was. I think it's ultimately unimportant.
Yeah, and this is why we stopped having the fight.
Yeah.
Was because I think we both came to a point where we were like, I don't think the answer is important.
Yeah. It is not important to me whether the entity is an alien, a fallen angel, an elder god, a Chthonian deity. Like any of these could be true, and that doesn't actually affect how the story works. So it can be any of those, and so at any time I thought that if we could actually see it, we would kind of have to answer that question.
Right. It would become too specific. What are the sparkle crinkles?
The sparkle crinkles.
Okay, so here's how I understand it, is that one of the key things we establish early on is that the entity is a creature of the water. This is part of how it expresses like the water, the stones thing is related to this, but this idea that like there is water running under the town and the entity largely can show up in places where there is water. And the sparkle crinkles, if we will, are intended to be a representation of like, what is it that's in the water? It's the actual physical representation of what it means for the entity to be in the water. That's my understanding of it. That's how I would explain it.
I had always thought of it as kind of pretty literally the mineral deposit that is sloughing off the entity, or that is the entity and is kind of getting into the water and thus into all of the people and the world.
Yeah, I think that's about right. So what did that contribute to the town taking care of its people? I feel like we're gonna come back around to this idea of like, why did the town take care of its people and what's that about? I'm not sure that the sparkle crinkles are specifically doing much of anything.
No,
there.
I think that was the theory.
That some person in the town had.
Yeah, that the people who made the celery soda thought. But that was one of many spaces where I think I don't know if it was exactly that they were wrong, but they didn't have the full picture, and so we tried to have each character, have some piece of the puzzle, and was trying to like was often building from incomplete information and creating something they thought that was true.
Alex asks, How does the one who blooms decides who needs taking care of and what persona to take on? Jeffrey, how does the entity work?
Oh boy. Okay. So the
I feel like if you had asked me the question, I would also be doing this, where your brain goes, okay, hold on. Where do I start?
Yeah,
Where's
right?
the beginning of the story?
Well, and I guess I also want to say that like this is how we conceived of it. And I think one of the interesting things about this story is that you can have a completely different interpretation of how this was all working. And as long as it still aligns with the text as, it exists
Yeah, I'm not going to tell
in
you
the
you're
world.
wrong.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
and like, I think also, it's part of why it was so much fun to write this really diverse town full of people whose relationship to the entity was all different, because everybody's gets to have their own understanding of what's going on here.
Absolutely.
And yet, when you run a writer's room and you're trying to write a story, you have to have a coherent logic.
Things need to be internally consistent.
Yeah, like
so
we had to
yeah.
have a theory of the case of. So I knew we have a show Bible floating around somewhere that has a section that's just titled "What the fuck is really going on here," and I feel like that's what we're about to do is that spiel.
Yeah. Well, and maybe what I want to say about that is that is a skeleton over which we hope that listeners have draped their own meat. By which
happy spooky season.
Yeah. No, but we tried to create a consistent set of facts, and you can draw your own conclusions from those.
All right.
Anyway,
caveats done. Do you want to take a stab? Or
yeah, let me take a first stab.
Okay.
So we have a entity which is larger than anything conceivable by a human consciousness. It is alive and intelligent, but is at such a different scale that it cannot interact with humans directly.
And I think about this largely as time scale, in the way that it would be very hard to talk to a fruit fly about what their life is like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any kind of complicated thoughts that we would want to try to impart to a fruit fly, its life is too short. It would be over too quickly. So it is also the way we eventually really locked in on it is that the entity is in the level at which it can interact and be recognizable to humans is an emotional one. So how does a creature that has emotions and has thoughts but cannot directly interact? The entity was kind of always filter feeding from memories of the town.
So we would talk about the relationship between the people in the town and the entity as being symbiotic.
Yeah.
That the entity draws great joy, great comfort, sustenance off of the memories and awareness of the people in the town. And then in turn, the entity feels as though it's sort of responsible for making sure that, all these folks who live around them can continue to thrive.
Sure. Well, and notably, the entity is not consuming or taking memories from people. The entity, and again, joy is exactly the right word. It does not need the memories to survive. It is not eating them. It is experiencing them, and that gives it joy. And so it wants to create an environment in the town that is as good as possible for people to want to come and
live there.
Yeah, live there. And notably, it's not a world in which people come and the entity can't let them leave, because it actually really benefits from people going out into the world and bringing memories back from all over. But once it has experienced those memories, it can create them in the real world. And we called those figments. quoting that's actually a term stolen from the Double Fine, I believe, game Psychonauts.
Yep, definitely didn't know that. Jeffrey apparently took that word from somewhere.
Yeah, well, so our internal word for ghosts was a figment, and
because we were looking for a way to distinguish them from ghosts.
Yeah,
that like everybody in the town thinks of them as ghosts, but as a writer's room, we were like, I mean, they're not really ghosts.
And a figment could be a person, it could be an animal, it could be a thing, a building. There are several very obvious figment buildings and some that are a little more subtle.
Jess Buha at one point wrote a scene where there was figment Velveeta cheese.
There was.
We cut that, but it was real funny.
I love the Velveeta cheese scene. Ghost cheese.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
No, but So
how does the entity, the one who blooms, going back to Alex's question, decide who needs taking care of and what persona to take on to do that?
So I think it ultimately wanted to care for everyone in the town. And we got to see a few of its kind of chosen figment avatars that were used to care for people. I think Wes being a really obvious one. When Dot needed help, it created Wes from the memory of Theodore Wesley from the 50s.
Of this kid who ultimately wanted to help people.
Yeah.
That, like, I think when you go to the episode where we go back in time and we see Wes as a real boy, not a figment, not a ghost, the story that we tell there is one of like, this kid was really motivated by, I want to help people and I want to be of service. And then that being this memory that the entity holds on to of like, this is a thing that a person can be, and then reaches for how can I help Dot in this time of need, and what it's like you put your hand out and go, what do I have in my inventory that can help with this? Oh, here we go. I have this teenager who's good at helping. Okay, we'll try this.
Yeah. I think there's a metaphor used at one point about the junk drawer, and you kind of reach in and you find, oh, there's like 15 screws in here and this one looks like the right size, and so I'll try to use that.
And I think we often would talk in the writer's room about the entity being not a logical thing, but an emotional thing. That, like, as a room full of writers and creators, like, we would often sit in the room and be like, okay, well, to solve this problem, you would need to do X and then Y and then Z. And then often someone would go, no. That's not that's how we, with our human brains, would want to solve the problem. But the entity, what does it mean to kind of react with like the first emotion you feel? Yeah. Which is like, oh no, I gotta do something. Or like, I'm scared of that. Or like, you make me feel alone. Like what is the sort of first blush emotional reaction, and what might it look like for this creature with these weird powers to kind of like pull on memories to solve those problems, which is, I think, why sometimes they don't totally make sense. Yeah. And like the thing about the wolves is very much like, we've turned a corner and things have gotten really scary. And the entity is like, I'm scared. I need to protect myself. And it's not a very grounded or like useful response, but it is a true one. Yeah.
Or the flooding. I mean, the flooding
is also like that. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that answers our question, is like, how does it decide and what persona? It's like some of it makes sense and some of it doesn't really.
Yeah. Some of it is reacting on first emotion. Yeah. Which can be tough.
All right. I'm going to end with what I think is a slightly lighter and easier question.
Heck yes.
Taylor says, if I want an Unwell tattoo, but I have no idea what to get, what would you recommend? Oh. Okay, so I feel weird about telling somebody I've never met on the internet what to put on their body. But I do feel like you and I could have a really fun conversation about like what Unwell tattoo might you get? Yeah. And might I get?
And listener, feel free, like, take any of these ideas you want or none of them. Someone
We don't know you and your life.
Yeah, but honestly, the idea of someone getting an Unwell based tattoo is just like the most incredible thing. I love tattoos. I have lots of them. I have thought a lot about my own Unwell tattoo.
It's coming, I'm sure.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
So my first reaction is I feel like I might reach towards something that plays with the imagery of birds and wolves.
Yeah.
Like that's a thing we have played with throughout the show. Is that as sort of like a dichotomy of the entity's inner turmoil. And I don't know, I always loved that. For a while I was like reaching around for some kind of merch design that would use that interplay in a way that was sort of evocative of like tarot cards. But it never really came together. So, but that is definitely a thing that I feel like if I was going for a tattoo, it might be something in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Birds and wolves. A lot of mine have involved actual wells that I've thought about. I think the symbolism of the kind of groundwater and the reaching into the depths for something life-giving, but that you can't really see is pretty deeply ingrained in the show.
Yeah.
Also, I do think there are some really lovely quotes that could be partnered with images of celery stalks. Celery, spicy, celery, cool.
Oh, I was gonna, so I have in my home, I have a piece of fan art that somebody drew that I printed out that is an illustration of Dot's quote. Make like a dung beetle and just keep, like, when life gives you shit, make like a dung beetle and just keep rolling. And man, I like, it's one of these things that I look at it all the time and I'm like, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Just keep rolling.
If you do, or if anyone ends up getting an
please let
Unwell
us
tattoo,
know.
please let us see
Oh my
it.
God.
Because that's just the coolest thing in the world.
It would make me so happy to know about that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All
Mitten,
right.
do you have any thoughts?
The cat does not seem to have any thoughts, but I'm glad we checked. All right, let's take a pause here. We have more questions that we're going to answer in the future times, and you'll get to hear soon. But this seems like a good stopping place. Jeffrey, thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor.
All right.
And thank you all of you for sending in your questions and for listening. We'll see you next time.
The Fable and Folly Network, where fiction producers flourish.